Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the two Congos, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of the Congo. And of course we have with us to talk about the chaos that is generally associated with these two Congos, DrLMadu1. And I'm sorry we have a gnat that's loose in the studio here, and it's causing quite a few problems. But nevertheless, Dr. Madu, let me welcome you to the show this morning and tell you how delighted we are to have you here and to talk about what you can only do in terms of bringing us the best information that we have in reference to some of the situations that are going on in Africa. We've talked about Egypt, we've talked about Sudan, we've talked about as we've indicated earlier, you are in reality our African, South American, North American expert in reference to some of these topics. And so let's talk about the two Congos and explain to our audience this morning where we came up with this idea of two Congos.
Well, it's a topic, you know, that's overdue, due to a lot of the problems that have been going on in that part of Central Africa, particularly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You know, we have two Congos, the Democratic Republic of the Congo with its capital in Kinshasa, and the Republic of the Congo with its capital in Brazzaville. In fact, it used to be called Belgian Congo because DRC was formerly colonized by the Belgians in 1908. The Republic of the Congo was formerly called French Congo because it was, you know, colonized by the French. In fact, Brazzaville got its name from a French explorer called de Brazza, you know. So Kinshasa was formerly called Leopoldville from King Leopold of the Belgians, you know. So in 1960, the former Belgian Congo became, you know, the Republic of the Congo.
This is all part of the independence of Africa all over the continent.
In those years, in 1960 became, you know, a republic, you know, of the Congo with its capital in Leopoldville. Then also the same year, the Republic of the Congo across the river, because the river separates Kinshasa from Brazzaville. You know, just a big river like the Cumberland River. Yeah. So in 1960, the Republic of the Congo in Brazzaville also became independent. In Leopoldville, Lumumba became the prime minister, you know, of the Congo, while Kasavubu became president and Mobutu became the army chief. In the other part, Alba Fulbe Yulu is a priest, became the first president, you know, of the Republic of the Congo in Brazzaville. Soon, you know, all hell broke loose in Kinshasa, in Leopoldville at that time. There was a problem between Lumumba and Shombe and the rest.
Lumumba.
Exactly, Patrice Lumumba and Shombe, and also the Belgians. When Lumumba accepted the instruments, you know, of power as prime minister, he made a very fiery speech, which the Belgians consider insulting. And at the same time, they got afraid that he might become, you know, a supporter of the Russians instead of the West. So they started using Shombe and the rest to sabotage, you know, Lumumba. Meanwhile, you know, the other part of the Congo was still, you know, as peaceful as you come.
That's French Congo, the French part.
Yeah, the French part of Congo, that was still calm. You know, in 1965. You know, Mobutu finally took power. You know, he had taken power in 1960 when he removed Lumumba. And Lumumba was eventually killed in Katanga, you know, now called the province of Shaba by Moise Shombe and the rest. Soon after, 65, Mobutu finally took over for real and stayed in power till 1997 when he was overthrown. Now, Mobutu was used, you know, by the Belgians to get rid of Lumumba because of the big mineral concession in Katanga province. You know, if you've heard of the Union Minière de Katanga, Union Minière, they controlled those mineral assets, and they felt Lumumba was a threat. So they funded Shombe to start a secessionist movement in Katanga, which the United Nations came in, and succeeded in crushing.
And so, Dr. Mu, we're getting ready for our first commercial break. But over the last 12 seconds here, let's say this, that we're talking about just vast amounts of mineral resources that are fought over by these Africans over a position that was formerly the French or the Belgium. And so, and of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. DrLMadu is talking about the two Congos, and he's giving us some information in reference to all of the wealth that the Congo pertained, and of course two former colonial powers, Belgium and France, through these Africans are simply fighting over this wealth. And DrLMadu, let's pick up where we left off and give our audience some additional information.
Yeah, like I was saying, Mobutu came in eventually and took over power for real, in 1965, overthrowing Kasavubu and installing a military regime. And he was in power till 67, till 1997. And there has been stories, both written and spoken, that the CIA and the Belgians, organized the rebellion that eventually led to Lumumba's death, because they felt he was a threat to Western economic interests in the Congo. Now, when you talk of this formerly Belgian Congo, you're talking of an area of land 905,000 square miles, larger than the whole of Western Europe put together. France, Britain, Belgium, all this put together is larger in area of land. In fact, it's 1/4 of the United States. Yes, and it's the second largest country in Africa after Algeria. Sudan used to be the second before the split. So you're talking of a huge area with gold, zinc, titanium, cobalt for planes and all this. Oh yes, you name it. It's all in the diamonds. In fact, one of the men behind, who was reputed to be behind, the CIA, to put Mobutu in power, Maurice Templesman, was, accorded monopoly of the diamond trade in the Congo throughout Mobutu's regime.
That's extraordinary. One individual given a monopoly of the diamond trade in the Congo.
That's correct, and that's exactly.
How do they get away with this, DrLMadu? I mean, go on.
They gave him those concessions, as to control the place. Now, when Mobutu came in, he regretted what he did, in killing Lumumba and trying to get his supporters to support him. He started changing the names of the cities. Like now, if somebody asks you where is Katanga, you won't be able to tell. It's called Shaba. He changed it to Shaba. And the city where Lumumba was killed, Elizabethville, the center of the copper industry, is now called Lumumbashi. Then the city of Elizabethville, where Lumumba's secessionist regime, after he was killed, his followers established a regime there. It's now called Kisangani, called Stanleyville before. And Mobutu, his name was Joseph Mobutu. He changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko, Kuku, when he was Abanga, meaning the all-conquering warrior who goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in its wake.
I mean, it would be humorous, Dr. Madu, if it was not so deadly for
right.
so many people in reference to. Go on.
That's correct. And when Mobutu came in, he became a darling of the Western interests. In Washington, he was feted all the time at the White House, even when he was executing his supporters, his opponents. In the other part of the Congo, things were still very quiet until '68, when the army overthrew the government. Marian Ngwabi took over power and overthrew, Fulba Yulu, as president, and then installed Masemba Debat, who was overthrown. Until 1991, the Congo was ruled as a military government. At that time, they called themselves the People's Republic of the Congo. Most of these regimes, when they took over, they called peoples. I remember a time I called the embassy for some information. I said, I think this is the People's Republic of the Congo. The ambassador said, no, it's the Republic of the Congo. I said, what happened to the people? He said, no more.
The people just disappeared from the name of the Congo, right. Period.
That's right.
It was just that simple.
Exactly.
It was just that simple.
No more people. So in 1992, they had a fair and free election, and a civilian took over, Pascal Lissouba. Now, one thing you should know about the Republic of the Congo is that it has a whole lot of oil. It has only a population of about 4.5 million. Area of land is about 132,000 square miles, but with huge resources of oil, very, very huge resources of oil. The linguistic composition of the Republic of the Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo are almost the same. You have the Congo people, the Congo Lingala speaking people. They're almost the same
right
language.
Across the river from one another, two different.
Exactly, and the demography is almost the same, But the Democratic Republic of Congo has about 80 million people now, and with a GDP of about 20 billion, which is not very much. Really, the per capita is about 236. With all that wealth, okay. But what is happening now is that when Kabila took over in 1997, after the overthrow of Mobutu, those who put him in power wanted, their own share of the loot. You understand? Rwanda and Uganda, they were instrumental in overthrowing Mobutu's regime and putting Kabila in power. Rwanda and Uganda wanted a share of the minerals as payment. Kabila didn't want to go for that. So in 1998, and that rebellion was launched. The Ugandans and the Rwandans invaded again to overthrow Kabila. Kabila called in the Angolans, the Namibians, the Chadians, the Zimbabweans to come and support him. That's what started what they call the Second Congo War, or the African World War.
The African World War.
Exactly. Right. And that lasted from 1998 to about 2003, when they had the Pretoria Agreement for disengagement. But what is significant about that is that the casualties in that war is the highest since the Chinese Civil War. Okay, the casualties since 1998 in the war in the Congo, 5.4 million people.
5.4 million people.
Yeah, and you don't hear about it.
And this is what they call the African
World
War.
Exactly.
And killing one another because of Belgium and France now relinquished that, and yet still they're still holding and dealing with the wealth there.
And some of those African countries who are fighting there, they are fighting there because of the mineral interest. Now, Zimbabwean troops don't want to leave because they want to continue taking some of the minerals as payment for supporting Kabila. Now, the Namibians, the same. The Angolans, the same. They all want their share. So they've carved out territories inside the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So even though with the agreement, a lot of them said they withdrawn their troops, but they have people still in there.
Okay, and Dr. Wu, let us take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. DrLMadu, and he's giving us some information about what is known as the two Congos in Africa, and all of the death and destruction that is occurring there, as well as all of the wealth that is present, and some of the struggles, especially the Europeans still being deeply involved in most of the struggles. And Dr. Madu, let's pick up where you wish in reference to this over the last 10 minutes that we have.
Yeah, so, while Mobutu was being overthrown in 1997, by Kabila, in Congo, in the Republic of the Congo, in Brazzaville, Sassou Nguesso, who was former president, his Cobra, militia was busy fighting with the government of Pascal Lissouba. And eventually Sassou Nguesso overthrew Lissouba and took over and devastated the whole country and Brazzaville. Up to now, they're still rebuilding, as we speak. But most of the things that happen in both Congos happen in the DRC because it's bigger, has larger mineral resources and all this. So most of the time is the problems in DRC overshadow what is happening in the Republic of the Congo.
Even tremendous destruction and etc. is going on, but it's nothing compared to what's going
on.
What's
going on in DRC? Exactly. So most of what you hear is things happen in DRC because of the size and the size of the loot and all that, and because of its history since 1960, So that war has killed about 5.4 million people. Now, what is significant about DRC is that when you have problem in that country, it affects the neighboring countries. Now, it is surrounded by over 8 countries, and all of them will suffer the effects. Tanzania, Mozambique, Angola, Republic of the Congo, you name it, Uganda, all these countries are around. So that's what has been happening. With that civil war, refugees are running into all these other countries. And these refugees, what happens? They turn over and become nearly armed gangs themselves to come back, you see. So that's the big problem. So if you look around there, you have about 5.4 million killed in DRC, in this so-called African World War. Then in Rwanda, you had over almost 1 million killed. That's what precipitated the war in the Congo, because when the Hutus, who were slaughtering the Tutsis, ran away, when General Kagame came in with the Tutsi army and drove them out, they all ran to the Democratic Republic of the Congo and armed themselves and started, armed cross-border incursions into Rwanda. Kagame had no, choice but to pursue them, send his army into the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And Kabila was waiting already, so they used Kabila as a prop because they accused Mobutu of arming the Hutu insurgents and letting them stay. So with that, Ugandans also came in because the Ugandans also related. You see, they have relations with those in Rwanda, because a lot of those who live in Uganda are also Tutsi. You see, and most of those in Rwanda in charge now are Tutsi also. Museveni, the president, is Tutsi. In a way, they are called Himas in Uganda. So, but he's Tutsi. Anyway. Exactly. So he has an interest in supporting his fellow Tutsis in Rwanda. You see. So most of those who live at the border between Rwanda and the Congo are Tutsis, even though they are, Congolese citizens. Their ethnic allegiance is in Rwanda. So they were used, as conduits, when these people invaded. So it's problematic. Then in Sudan, the same thing. In Angola, the rebels from DRC take shelter in Angola. Then the rebels in Angola take shelter in DRC. Exactly. So you see how these cross-border problems. Well, and then interfamily relationships.
During the last 3 or 4 minutes here, it really does not appear that there is any kind of solution to that kind of violence and that kind of disorganization and chaos, I think, as you've indicated. I mean, what entity can deal with all of those elements within in the Congos?
Well, if one wants to, specifically with DRC, we might apportion some blame at times, say the Belgians and all this. But really, ultimately, responsibility is at the feet of the African rulers themselves. You see, quite frankly, you know, the colonizers have came in, did what they did or whatever, and left. And in fact, you know, the colonizers weren't all that selfish. They built firm structures even in Leopoldville when they were there, you know. But the African rulers, when they came in with a lot of ethnic garbage, ethnic baggage, you know, put it that way, you know, catering for the interests of their ethnic groups and themselves instead of seeing themselves as, you know, nationalists. And those Africans who came in as nationalists were not liked by the departing colonialists. You know what I mean? Yes, people like Nkrumah, Nyerere, Lumumba, they were not very liked because they came in with a broad-mindedness into
bring all of Africa,
exactly,
total Africa by Africans
exactly,
kind of thing.
Build their countries up, and they weren't corrupt. But the corrupt ones who were willing to be corrupted by the departing colonizers were the ones who started creating these problems. You see, so genuine African leaders have come in, but in cooperation with, you know, the internal, you know, fifth columnists. The Western powers were able to sabotage what good they wanted to do for their people. So really, you can ascribe 90% of the blame to the African leaders. Really. You know, a lot of, okay, for example, all these leaders looting money in Africa. Hey, people from Washington are not going over there taking the money and putting it in their pockets. Yeah, they are doing it themselves. You see? So a lot of those problems you see now in the Democratic Republic of Congo boils down to the same thing since 1960. You know, it's my ethnic group first instead of the nation. You know, when Kabila came in, a lot of people had high hopes. But I said at that time in the Tennessean interview that, look, being in the bush as a guerrilla leader is a different thing than being an administrator. There are two different things. Yeah, Kabila has been in the bush since 1960s, with, you know, when he was part of the Lumumba's system. But he has never governed anything. And when he came in, he displayed that incompetence. He was busy looking out for himself instead of, you know, rallying the people, you know, not paying his troops, the people who are supposed to guard you. From the story I heard, he abused his bodyguards so badly that even when they were hungry, they have not been paid. You know, the people who guard you alive. That shows the arrogance of our leaders there. His own bodyguards have not been paid for a while. So some of them were very hungry one afternoon. Kabila's wife, you know, gave them some chicken to eat. They said Kabila drove in and took it away from the soldiers. We're supposed to, okay, that's just a story from the Congolese. Okay, so that's the kind of callousness, the way they treat their people. That's an example there. That you know, their interest is not everybody's interest, but their own. Okay, a country like that with those riches. Is there any reason why they shouldn't have the best hospitals?
Everything, best
roads, best schools, with so much wealth everywhere? That's a good question. Nobody's preventing them from doing that, but the people who run the country. You see? So that's a big problem. Republic of the Congo is the same, with 4.5 million people with so much oil to develop everywhere. Yet people be complaining about food, water, electricity. So it's not the French preventing Sassou Nguesso and his regime from improving the people's lives. You see, they might have, you know, some strings to pull. Don't misunderstand me. They still pull some strings, but 90% of the strings is in African hands. You know, the French and the Belgians and the, you know, might have some strings they pull in terms of finances. Say, look, our interests.
But still, the great ability to be able to change things is not with France or Europe or
That's
whatever.
Correct.
It's with Africans,
it's with the Africans
and the Congolese themselves on both sides of the river.
Exactly, it's with the Congolese themselves. It's not the Belgians, and the Belgians don't even have enough power to do anything now, whatever the Congo wants to do.
And Dr. Madu, we're ending this show for today, but I think that the information that you've given is just revealing in terms of what is going on in the Congo. We rarely hear anything, all of millions of people being killed and et cetera, and yet and still we hear very little about it, and it seems as if a lot of folks are caught up in hopeless kinds of situations, and I'm glad that you could bring us by some information in reference to that. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is institutional racism in African American youth, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about institutional racism and African American youth, Dr. E. Kelly Sanford from Tennessee State University. Dr. Sanford has been with us on many occasions, and he has given us excellent information. As a matter of fact, Dr. Sanford, let me welcome you to the show and to remind our audience that quite recently you gave us some information in reference to the nature of prejudice, calling upon Gordon Allport and others in order to lay a foundation for our real understanding of the nature of prejudice. And I believe that we're sort of are prepared to receive the same kind of information today in reference to institutional racism and African American youth. But let's look at your position, Dr. Sanford, and have you to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of the things that were important in terms of eventually bringing you to us, and then we'll get into institutional racism and the impact that it is having on African American youth.
Yes. Well, again, I'm Dr. E. Kelly Sanford. I'm a professor of sociology at Tennessee State University, and I've been here now within this TBR system for over 15 years. I got my undergraduate degree from North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina, and my PhD from Howard University, and my postdoc degree from Pennsylvania State University, State College, Pennsylvania. I've had a number of different research positions over the course of my career, but I've been very endowed with the opportunity to be able to teach on the collegiate level for a large number of years. One of my specialty areas is in that of African American youth, racism. I teach courses in the nature of prejudice. I also teach in health and wellness, as well as the sociology of education. And so I think our topic today is very poignant in discussing African American youth and how institutionalized racism is very much connected to some of the ills and symptoms of our youth today.
You know, Dr. Sanford, when you think about this topic, and I think that quite a number of folks talk about institutional racism, but let's have you as a sociologist explain to our audience this morning exactly what we mean by institutional racism. It's not just a phrase that we pull out of the air, but there's a real meaning in terms of institutional racism and how it's a part of the institutions. Talk about it from that perspective, and then by the next segment we'll be able to get into the impact that this is having upon African American youth.
Absolutely. We have to understand that America for 244 years enslaved people of African descent here in America. And then there were 81 years of Jim Crow laws that led into segregation and then eventually desegregation, and with the civil rights movement brought about a set of laws that tried to improve certain things here within the American culture. However, with those 244 years and thinking about where we are today in 2013, you have to understand that the primary institutions that make up the society was institutionalized racism. That became a part of the culture. So in many instances of what we'll be referring to today, it impacts the subconscious of groups of people that live within America that belong to our institutions, such as education, such as the family, such as economics, such as the healthcare system, such as the laws that make up the society in which we live in. So when we think about the idea of unfairness, when we think about the idea of how certain people within a society may be treated indifferently and in an inequitable way in comparison to others, it could be institutional. And that's what we refer to when we think in terms of institutionalized racism. It's a very part of the fabric of the American society in which we live in. And in many instances, we operate in the subconscious, because many people will not say they're racist, but they actually operate because it is so institutionalized, and we just think that that is the way it is.
That's all part of the way we do things and the way things are and have been, and et cetera. And so therefore they become institutionalized, and that becomes a part of the culture itself. And as you indicated, people start acting and reacting within that framework without ever thinking about what they're acting in reference to. Would that be sort of an assessment in terms of how very difficult it is to deal with this as an issue itself?
Absolutely, and that's why we as social scientists try to bring to light some of the issues that are certainly centered around that particular issue of institutionalized racism. For instance, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois made a reference to the problem of the 20th century with the problem of the color line. And here we are in the 21st century and we're still dealing with some of the same issues. That's not to say that we haven't made some substantial changes and progress over those hundreds of years of being here in America. We have a President Barack Obama for a second term. But that still does not negate the fact that it's institutionalized and we still have to confront that as an issue.
Very good. Of course, let us take this first commercial break and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Professor Dr. E. Kelly Sanford from Tennessee State University, and he's dealing with the issue of institutional racism and African American youth, the impact that institutional racism is having not only upon American society, but primarily upon African American youth. And let's continue our discussion, Dr. Sanford, in reference to some of the impact that this idea of institutional racism is having upon various segments of American society.
Yes. Well, I would like to just speak in terms of that youth problem, because it is a substantial problem that we still have here presently today throughout the urban as well as rural areas here in the United States. We disproportionately have issues related to poverty. I think that is at the core of a lot of the issues that is in existence. Poverty then impacts the family. Family then impacts them having an ability to have a certain type of education. Education then impacts them having a certain type of occupation. So when these things are institutionalized within society, you will have subgroups of different people from different ethnic groups that will be disproportionate within the prison systems, within the education system, within healthcare problems. And so it runs the whole gamut of different ills of our society. And racism is at the core of it. Now, we talked about this issue, and to try to give one good example that is very poignant right now within our society is that of the Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case. That was something that was very, very substantial when you think about the color line in the 21st century. Now, one might say we live within the United States where we have a constitution, and certainly we have laws. So when you have a particular law and you're innocent until proven guilty, a jury is of course set there. So one might say, well, how does that then impact? Well, this is where institutionalized racism come into play when you select a jury, and they might have some preconceived notions that Dr. Gordon Allport would talk about with prejudice. And one might try to tell a particular jury not to be. But then when all the facts are out there, one might still do, as you saw happen, to wrongly not accuse this person of a particular murder. Now, 1954 through 56, we had another issue that was quite similar, the Emmett Till case. You had a same type of a jury. They found those two men innocent. Here in 2013 with Zimmerman, they found him innocent. So this is an issue that is meant by institutionalized racism and how it has an impact. Now, what usually happens within our society stems back to that hundreds of years of enslavement that gives people disproportionate opportunities in education, in occupation, as well as within economics. And that causes subgroups of people, say African American youth, to disproportionately not have certain opportunities. Now that's not to say, because I know some of the listening audience will say, we have many, and certainly we do, percentage of African American youth as well as other ethnic youth that come from family members that are highly educated, have opportunities to allow them to have certain chances within society, and they do very well. But it's just a large percentage of people that do not have that opportunity and find themselves within the criminal justice system disproportionate. And this is the issue that we have to understand as being institutionalized within the society. We have multinational corporations, and you have to see that the prison system happens to be one of those. Dr. Charles C. McIntyre makes reference in her book to criminalizing a race, where she sees where prison systems are just like McDonald's or Starbucks. You have large numbers of people in there, you have to build more prison systems, you have to have more people to work in there, so it becomes functional within our society to have a subgroup of people to be disproportionate within those systems because it becomes a business.
And this is one of the things I think that the Attorney General is concerned about when we talk about incarceration of African American youth and etc. Say something in reference to that.
Yes. Well, that is a big issue because we are disproportionate within the prison systems as well as other ethnic groups as well. And some of the laws and things will have to change. We have to also see how it is systematic and then try to go into urban areas, rural areas, low-income areas, try to improve systems there with families working, trying to have programs there. As you can see within the government right now, they want to take away what they like to call set-asides and not to help people with Head Start programs, with outreach types of programs that are certainly needed in order to help the youth. Because if that's not there, these particular youth will certainly do something with their time, and in many instances, and more than likely, it's going to be a crime, and that will end up getting them into the criminal justice system. I would like to say one little quick comment about the education, because sometimes people feel like it's the teachers in the classroom. When we can have support by family members at home, then we'll be able to solve that problem. But it becomes systematic when you have to have people who are working or can't work and can't be home to provide for the children. So it's like a perpetual motion of problems that exist within poverty.
And so in a real sense, do you believe that more economic opportunities for African American youth, well, for youth period, would help solve quite a number of our social problems? I think you can recall when at one time we had CETA programs and Head Start and Job Corps and a lot of these programs, which many people believe to be expensive, but they were not expensive when you compare it to deaths and incarceration and et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that if we take that route that we might be able to change and turn some of these things around?
Absolutely. I know it would be. I mean, that's at the core of it. If we had job opportunities in junior high and high school for students to be able to go out and get skills, to then be able to work, I believe President Obama has tried to make a strong emphasis to try to improve everyone from pre-kindergarten all the way through so that they can develop themselves. And if they can have those types of programs out there, it would certainly be a plus. It would help youth to have opportunities to be able to be trained and to be able to get employment. And that's one of the major problems. We don't have those types of programs in there. And then when we think about the paradigm that we talked about in the first segment, there's a big issue of affirmative action, and I was very pleased with our Supreme Court this time still supporting it, because we still live in a society where that is needed. And so there is that need for Head Start, for other type of seed programs, or educational innovation to try to help youth within our society to do better. Poverty is at the core of the issue. Racism is certainly connected to that. And with those things being recognized, we have to recognize it as a symptom before we can then do something about it.
Do you think, in other words, all of the money that we might be using to incarcerate individuals, regardless of why they are there and et cetera, but in the end, it all boils down to a large number and we have to pay for that. Do you think that part of that money could be diverted in a real sense to a large number of programs dealing with these young people, economic programs and et cetera, that it would have a tremendous impact upon American society? Yeah,
I believe you're absolutely right. I think if we put that type of fund and that type of emphasis on the front end of education, on the front end of helping families succeed, that could indeed help you.
We're going to have to stop for this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. E. Kelly Sanford from Tennessee State University, and he's talking about the implications in a real sense of some of the things that are happening in reference to institutional racism and the impact that it is having upon African-American youth, as well as other youth in American society. But
Absolutely.
we are today specifying African-American youth within that regard. Go on.
Yes, and on the last segment, we mentioned how if we had money up front rather than placing it into the prison systems, how we could indeed improve African-American youth. I think an excellent case study is Dr. Kennedy in Harlem. Over 70 blocks of pure poverty, where he has a school system there where he's able to take those students, and every one of them, 100%, graduates, and then at a high percentage, 100%, go on to the universities and they graduate as well. But he has a very innovative educational system that helps them. It's holistic. He brings in the family members, the community, and everyone that's involved. He makes sure they have something to eat, just like someone in a rich area would have something to eat. He makes sure they have health care, just like someone in a rich family would have a health care. So he takes a holistic approach, and if we had that up front to help people in different communities around the United States, I think we should certainly see a vast improvement with African American youth, as well as other ethnic groups that are in the criminal justice system. I wanted to also, if I could, pick up on how we started off at the very outset, thinking in terms of this institutionalized racism and Dr. Gordon Allport and the nature of prejudice. When you think in terms of it, he has a 5 scale on acts of prejudice. One he calls interlocution. And that's when groups of people might get around and they might congregate and they might talk about certain things. And some people in there may not act out in a very negative way toward others, but they might listen and agree and support it. The second one is avoidance, when you might want to avoid issues related to problems that might be in existence within our society. Oh, they live over there, or they live in a poverty.
That's not a problem.
That's not a problem for us. That's not our problem. And then the next one is discrimination. When that same group of people in interlocution or avoidance start to say, well, let me then send my child over into this area, or let's move to another area so we can avoid being with that particular group, or let's send ours to the private school. Then the next one is physical attack, going back to the same type of act on a prejudice that Zimmerman did when he saw a person. He had a prejudice, a preconceived notion that was unwarranted about another individual, and then a physical attack that would occur. And that's the pure nature of it, and even in the subconscious. And the last level Dr. Gordon Allport talks about, as we've seen in America and across the country, is that of extermination. That's an extreme act on prejudice. But I think what he brings out so poignantly in his book, The Nature of Prejudice, is that all of them are very inclusive to the last one that's the worst. But the last one, you have members that belong to the interlocution. So when you're voting in a certain way, or you're siding a certain way on an issue that's avoiding someone who's in need and voting against those types of issues, you are acting on a type of prejudice.
That's part of what we mean when we talk about institutional
racism.
But you declare that you're not a racist yourself, because you know some people, and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
But in terms of your subconscious in reference to how you deal with that, you are in reality part of what we call institutional racism.
Institutional
it's
racism.
There.
It's there.
And you don't want to admit it, but it's there anyway.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly what we're saying. Now I want to try to move it to a higher level, because sometimes within, let's just say, since the topic is African American and African American youth and institutionalized racism, sometimes African Americans who have moved up, had certain types of economic success, might feel that they have a false sense of reality as to where they might be within the society in which we live in, and feel that everything has been rid as far as racism is concerned. And sometimes that group that is indeed acting out in a very prejudicial way will look for a person of color, African American in particular, or any other ethnic group, who might think in that very same way. And that person might avoid trying to think consciously about how racism still exists. And what I usually try to ask a person, if they think because they have become highly educated, highly successful, if they went down to Jasper, Texas, and if their 550 SLC Mercedes had a flat tire, and if that same person driving that truck saw them walking up dressed up in their Giorgio Armani suit, but they were African American or another person of color, would they have done a U-turn and picked them up and dragged them as they did that person that they did that to? You see, sometimes we feel that we get so far removed from that because we become medical doctors or lawyers. And that's why I really appreciated President Barack Obama when he spoke about, well, yes, I'm president, but we still have this systematic institutionalized racism that exists within our society today. And it hits youth, it hits the healthcare system, it hits the educational system, it hits the economic system. All of those institutions that make up our society has that racism part that's still very present in it.
And a lot of folks don't want to deal with that, nor do they want to believe that.
That's right.
Somehow there is no institutional racism, and that all you have to do is to pull yourself up by your bootstrap, which might work sometimes.
That's
but
right.
if it's institutional, you might pull yourself up by bootstraps here, but they'll catch you over there somewhere.
That's
so
right.
what we're talking about here is that we want to eliminate.
Yes.
Even though we might not be able to eliminate it, but make people much more aware of it.
That's correct.
And they can react to it differently.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying here?
That's exactly what we're saying. And there's a book entitled Privilege, Power, and Difference. And in this particular book, the author, who's a sociologist, suggests very strongly that those in the dominant group, meaning European Americans, have to understand this institutionalized racism in order to rid it. You can't get rid of it unless we can see it for what it is. It has to be diagnosed, no different than if you went to a medical doctor and they said you have the symptoms of the flu and you have to do these things to try to improve. We have to see that. And that's one of the problems, according to Dr. Joyce Leary, that we have in America, because we have never recognized or looked back on those 244 years of enslavement and said that's a problem that we have to include within our educational system to discuss, so all ethnic groups, the majority group as well as other ethnic groups, can talk about it. We have to see it as a ill, and then we can rid it and try to improve on it.
Over the last 2 minutes,
Yes.
somebody might be watching this show this morning and might wonder, am I impacted by institutional racism? What are some of the things that you can say that they can make their own self-assessment in terms of their attitudes and reference over the last couple of minutes?
Yes.
What,
Yes.
1, 2, 3, that
Yes.
kind of thing?
Yeah, there are plenty of things. One, we're having an obesity problem within our country. And in many instances, you find disproportionate African Americans are in that particular category. Second, when you look at any type of chronic illnesses, you will find that African Americans are certainly fall within all of those chronic illnesses, from heart attacks to diabetes to hypertension to high blood pressure, all of those things. And we can be very high in socioeconomic status as well as in job and in education, but we still have the symptoms. Dr. Leary talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, how we might have this unconscious type of way of thinking that we're okay, but these actions that people inflict upon us still impact us in that way. And then in many instances, while we might be in a situation where we might live a certain way, we might find that even our children, when they are out and trying to improve and to better themselves, they may be confronted with it. And so how do we go about explaining that to them when they are being bright, when they are working very hard and doing the best they can, and you still can see that the reason they did not get the first violin position, or they did not get the opportunity for the scholarship, or they were left out in some type of way, is because of this same institutionalized racism that still exists. And if we have a viewing audience that, because I know we've been talking about African Americans, but what we have said today really is very inclusive to all other ethnic groups, as well as we are dealing with here in Tennessee right now with gay brothers, lesbian sisters, and being able to get married. You're going to find the same nature of prejudice that exists among any other group that is kind of looked at as the out group.
And it's part of the immigration problem, and all those problems that are associated with that. All of that has a degree of institutional racism involved, and those individuals who get caught up in it ought to become much more aware of it. And I believe that there are a large number of folks who often get caught up in it, and if they knew more about it through information and education, I think, as you've indicated before, then their attitude could possibly change and might change.
That's right.
Because unless you know, then there's nothing that you can fight against. But once you know, and you can hold yourself to a task in reference to this. And Dr. Stanford, let me thank you for bringing that excellent information to us today. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. has Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is employment for ex-offenders, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about some of the difficult problems that individuals who have been incarcerated and once are released, some of the problems that they have in terms of trying to secure employment. And our first guest is a person who is not who is certainly not a stranger to comments with Dr. James Haney, Pastor K. Walker. And Pastor K. Walker has been with us on so many occasions, and I think, Pastor Walker, you go back to the 1990s, early parts of the 1990s with us. You and several others came to us dealing with some of the issues, and you're still with us. And of course we have who also has been with us, Miss Jackson, Miss S. Jackson, Miss Sherry Jackson, the founder of an organization called HUGGS, Miss Jackson. And of course, when we get to you, you'll explain to us the acronyms dealing with HUGGS. And a newcomer in reference to this particular show, Miss Jordan. and Miss Kay Jordan, as a matter of fact. And let me tell all three of you how delighted we are to have you as guests with us this morning to talk about this very, very important issue. Let's start off with you, Pastor Walker, by having you to give us some statements in reference to your background, education, and some experiences, and of course that will be followed by Ms. Jackson and Ms. Jordan.
All right, Dr. Haney, first of all, thank you for allowing us to be on the show again to discuss some very important issues. My name is Pastor Kelvin L. Walker, pastor of the Hands of God Christian Church. We're located at 600 North 2nd Street in East Nashville. I was born and raised right here in Nashville, Tennessee. I think I had some pretty good parents, and still do. But I went to the public school systems here, did a few studies at Tennessee State University. Of course, prior to that, I was in the Navy, got out, got a GED through Opportunities Industrialization Center, OIC. And from there, went into Tennessee State University. But because of the lifestyle that I was living in, crime and drugs and drug addiction and stuff, that didn't pan out too well. And then while incarcerated in the Tennessee State prison system, I proceeded to pursue a degree, but never accomplished one through Rebecca East Campus Prison Program while incarcerated. And of course, I got out, and years passed. I did some studies at Edmondson Junior College, which no longer exists now in the state in terms of business, but never got a degree in anything, but just a measure of knowledge in some of everything. That's what brings me on your show here today.
Very good. And of course, Ms. Jackson.
Hi, I'm Sherry Jackson. I was born and raised in Chicago. I had came to Nashville, Tennessee when I was about 19 years old, and I just had 3 children here, and I raised them here. All of them are high school graduates, and they're, proceeding to go to college also. Also, I'm in college. I finished up at TSU. Thank you, Lord, for that. I have been incarcerated over and over again, and